today. We will then, members will have deliberations, and by deliberations, that just simply means these are questions of clarity, really, that speak to the presentation, and then we will keep going accordingly. So, honorable members, and to our, I feel like to our select public, it's not the general public, it's the select public who are here for public hearings. Let me also welcome you. The agenda is there before us, so let me just procedurally ask for any member who would like to move for the adoption of the agenda. Thank you, Honorable Bateman, and seconded by Honorable Sigede. So with the agenda then being duly adopted, Mashile, are there any apologies for today?
Yes, good morning, Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members and the guests. We do have apologies from the Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. Sarupen. We also have an apology from Honorable Kwankwa, Honorable Wakelin. Mr. Majosi will be running late. Ms. Noliolo Magazi is on sick leave. Thank you, Chair.
From the political parties, are there any apologies? Yes, Honorable Kalaka Mazibuko.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I had also apologized for coming late. I think Mr. Mashile because he sees me here, but for the discipline because I came after you have opened, so let me. And I apologize for Honorable Ntuli. She's not well. Thank you.
No, that apology is noted, and yeah, and I know we keep her in our thoughts, so and in prayers. Let me, with those apologies then being noted, we will then proceed. I want to welcome COSATU. They will present first, represented by Mr. Tony Ehrenreich, who I was just thinking, welcome, sir. I was just thinking, for as long as I've been in politics, I have known you. So I'm great. I was just reflecting earlier on saying, you know, I love the fight. So I certainly look forward to our engagement today. But in all the time, I still have not been sent our membership to COSATU. But we will deal with that debate at its appropriate time. Welcome, sir, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and can I also thank you for that kind introduction. Thank the committee for inviting COSATU and giving us the opportunity to present our perspective on the budget appropriations. And so with that, I'll proceed straight into our presentation. I should just make a disclaimer that my comrade Matthew Parks, who's in the USA working on the AGOA agreement and lobbying for people there, was meant to do the presentation. I will do my best to stand in for him, but there may be some matters that I refer back on the questions. So just to alert you at the outset. So then, Chair, if I can move to the first slide, it's the introduction. As COSATU, we're extremely disappointed with the lackluster 26-27 budget and appropriations bills. While we appreciate the many progressive allocations that COSATU had campaigned for, the overall budget fails to respond to the fundamental crisis facing the working class and the economy. For example, the 43% nearly unemployment levels, up with 1.6% from the State of the Nation address, the staggering unemployment rate, weak economic growth, struggling public and municipal services, and the SOEs have many, many challenges that we're not overcoming with the urgency required. The entrenched poverty, crime, and corruption continues to remain endemic features of our life and requires urgent response. Tragically, Chair, the budget is focused on balancing books at the expense of kickstarting economic growth and tackling unemployment. On the public services, the key to growing the economy and creating jobs is to ensure public services have the necessary resources to fulfill their constitutional mandate. We welcome the 18 billion rand enrolling 300,000 more grade R learners, 7.8 billion for the NHI, 24 billion for revitalizing public health care, 92 billion for district health, 21 billion hiring of doctors, 3,000 home affairs staff, and the progressive eradication of over 4,000 ghost posts. We're deeply worried that no funds have been allocated for the additional 10,000 permanent labor inspectors pledged in the State of the Nation address. We believe that Treasury must provide additional funds to the Department of Employment and Labour to appoint the 10,000 new labour inspectors to respond to the range of challenges that we have in the labour market at the moment. We believe we should fill frontline vacancies, example, the positions around doctors, nurses, paramedics, teachers, and police. We should extend the ghost post order to all departments, entities, municipalities, and SOEs, because this has clearly been a feature of corruption in many of those departments. We should reduce the executives and senior management in favor of shifting resources to the frontline posts that provide important day-to-day services to our constituencies and to the population of South Africa. On local government, the municipalities are the state's Achilles heel, with over 60% in financial distress and many struggling to provide basic services or pay staff. 27 billion rand to improve Metro's ability to provide basic services, and the bill correctly states is critical. We welcome plans to amend the MFMA to strengthen government's ability to intervene timeously in those municipalities where the problems have been ongoing for the longest time. We welcome the plans to roll out 320,000 houses to electricity and the rollout of 258,000 smart meters. Many of our challenges in Eskom is non-payment, and the introduction of smart meters go a long way to address that and removing some of the challenges in communities related to that. We fear that there aren't enough to fix the dysfunctional municipalities and tackle the rising debt and deal with corrupt and incompetent management. Clearly, more urgent steps and a greater quantum should be allocated to deal with those challenges. Our proposals are as follows, Chair: that an urgent intervention to stabilize the increasingly dysfunctional municipalities, including tackling revenue and expenditure obligations. It is a critical new municipal funding model, and the white paper on local government be finalized. We want to enlist Eskom, Sunrail, and the Department of Water and Sanitation to ensure delivery of basic services and the recapacitation of struggling municipalities. This continues to be one of the key areas of service delivery and an area that we clearly are not doing enough in respect of the allocations. On the state-owned enterprises, COSATU commends the substantial progress in stabilizing and rebuilding the SOEs, notwithstanding that we worry about the path of the SOE bill that's meant to put in place a Tumusek model in South Africa. It seems to be stuck in its progress, and it's a key part of restructuring and addressing some of the challenges in SOEs. We believe that more must be done to help Eskom to reduce the electricity tariffs, return Transnet and Metro Rail to full capacity to unlock growth and jobs. This is important both in respect of transport of workers and communities, but as well as the freight capacity to ensure that we're able to move our products from pit to port and take advantage of many of the economic opportunities as the global economy restructures. Over 1 trillion rand that has been allocated to energy, rail, ports, water, roads, and airport infrastructure investment will certainly boost growth and jobs in these important sectors. We're dismayed by the lack of a turnaround plan for Denel, the SABC, the South African Post Office, and Postbank. And we ask that we expedite the interventions into the embattled Road Accident Fund. The Road Accident Fund is an unfortunate example of where, in this case, lawyers are the ones who appear to be milking the system at the cost of its important social benefit and social response to the challenges. Our proposals in respect of state-owned enterprises are as follows. There should be continued support for the South African post offices. The lack of the rolling out of that debt relief package is leading to many retrenchments and the reduction of the capacity in the South African post office to the level where it's not going to be able to be functional. And we've had discussions about the importance of the post office, both in circulating important services to poorer communities, but overcome the disadvantages where the market doesn't necessarily respond to providing important services due to the cost implications that it would have for the length and the distance to those services. We want to hear what the clear and detailed interventions plans are for Postbank, Denel, and the Road Accident Fund. On law enforcement, the State of the Nation address committed to a Marshall Plan to tackle unacceptably high levels of crime and corruption, yet no new allocations have been provided for SAPS, the NPA Hawks, and the judiciary to ensure that they have the capacity to win this existential war. We welcome the additional allocations to the Border Management Authority and the South African Defence Force are important, but the latter falls short of ensuring our military personnel receive the full support they require, in particular the basics of 3 meals a day. The COSATU proposal is as follows: that additional resources for SAPS, the NPA, Judiciary, SNDF, and SARS be implemented as a matter of urgency. And these measures clearly will support many of the crime-fighting measures that have been indicated by the deployment of the Defence Force and many community and other initiatives across the country to confront criminality more urgently. On the economic stimulus more broadly, the absence of a bold stimulus package for SMMEs, industrial and export sectors are deeply worrying. We also believe that law enforcement must tackle the construction mafia, as they also present a significant hindrance to the rollout of infrastructure and the economic growth that's a direct consequence of that. We need, as a government, to support and cushion the fragile economic sectors exposed to high electricity prices, trade turmoil, oil prices, consumer price index hikes, and the spread of many of the challenges that exist in the economy. One of the biggest concerns for us is that the 3 billion rand that's been allocated to SMMEs is clearly not sufficient to deal with the challenge in SMMEs, to grow the economy, to respond more urgently for the needs for jobs. And the saddest comparison is when we compare that to the 4 billion rand that has been allocated for bodyguards and security for politicians. The DTIC budget cuts of 10% undermines the effort to boost manufacturing and reindustrialization. That's got to be the keenest area that we make an investment in our public funds to make sure that we support industries, new areas of economic development, and many of the rare earth minerals that we do have, we should be ensuring that both the funding and the industrial capacity exist for us to take advantage of those commodity booms. On the economic stimulus, the COSATU proposals are as follows. We ask that we extend the fuel levy relief for workers in the economy. It has had a significant impact in curtailing the rise of food prices, and we believe it can have a further mitigating effect to the price implications of both the war in the Middle East and its implications on fuel prices across the world. We believe that we should tighten parliamentary oversight over infrastructure programs rollout and ensure that that takes place more effectively. There should be more effective law enforcement to stem construction mafias and cable theft. And we've clearly seen that more and more of these instances of criminality is done in an organized fashion. It's not opportunistic, to put food on the table kind of criminality, but it's more structured and organized. Many of it linked to important areas of social capital within our society, and that's why it needs an urgent and dedicated response so that we urgently respond to the deepening challenge of corruption embedding itself in the social fabric of our society. We believe that we should engage the PIC, the Development Bank of South Africa, and the IDC to boost economic infrastructure investments. We've noted that there's limited finances available in the fiscus through the budget directly on its departments, but in many of those institutions, the jobs are to play an important role of boosting the economy, but they also have significant funds on their books available to do that, and we believe they should now be rolling that out as a matter of urgency, and government should urge them in that direction. We would request that there be an urgent engagement at NEDLAC on the SMMEs. How do we boost small business development? What are we doing about industrialization, both defending our industrial capacity as a fairly developed economy and expanding that into the new areas of economic development that is taking place? But finally, also, what is the stimulus package that government is putting on the table, and how is that structured into the different departments to make sure that we have the outcomes that lead to growth of the economy and the job opportunities that would go with that? We believe that we should only fix the Unemployment Insurance Fund temporary employment relief scheme. It has played an important role in the rollout of and the response to COVID, but many, many challenges in the institutional framework and the governance of the institution within the department. There's been a lot of turnover in staff, there's been some suspensions, there's been an attempt to consolidate and respond to the challenges, and we ask that government speed that up. As we see AI playing itself out in our economy, there's no doubt that with that and the impact of the global tensions and conflicts on our economy is going to lead to further job losses and implications. And we've got to ensure that the institutions that are meant to respond and provide some relief to people are effectively managed and positioned to respond to that. And then we have to, as an urgent basis, fix the mining rights allocation system. It clearly is not serving the broader needs of our society, and it's not responding to the obligations of deeper and greater transformation that doesn't only benefit a few. On social relief, we are deeply angered by no CPI rise for 8 million social relief of distress grant recipients, yet the members of parliament receive their increases. Clearly, we should be measured by what we do for the least in our society, not what we do for the most in our society. And this clearly is an indication of the areas that we're not responding as elegantly to the desperate need of our people as we should be. On NSFAS, the threshold was not adjusted for CPI, and that clearly poses many problems for the future economic development of our country, because many of those youths may fall out of their tertiary educational training options, and that would be both a wastage of money, but also a disappointment in developing the human capital of our society. We are disappointed about the presidential employment program that was cut by half from 8.8 billion to 4.5 billion. If anything, at this point in our country's history, with more than a 40% unemployment level, we should not be cutting employment programs, and instead should be bolstering that. And it's in that regard that we say we need to revamp the jobs program to pool the funding, reduce corruption and wastage, and comply with the national minimum wage and provide training and experience needed for work. It's really about making sure that we develop an overall approach to the skills and the systems in the labor market, and that we are able to, as a government, support the execution of many of those areas that will and should contribute to the consistent growth and development of our economy. Then finally, we want to say that Treasury must commit to further engagements to finalize the next phase of the two-pot reforms. We have previously outlined that I think it was about a 7 billion rand input benefit into the economy as a result of the two-pot pension. It provides significant relief to workers. It's introduced the notion of greater flexibility around how people are able to manage their finances, with more consideration for the kind of pressures that people have. We've stressed this many times, that it's more desirable for somebody to be able to plug into their retirement savings than to go to a loan shark that charges them interest rates that would get them into debt traps when they have equity and finances that's available, but that's not freed up because of the systems put in place, often to protect the interest not of the workers whose money it is, but the fund managers, so that they can continue to ensure that they get the significant compensation out of the investment of those funds. On the social relief proposals, Kusatu wants to suggest the following: that Parliament must adjust the SRD grant for CPI in 2026, and we must move to ensure that it reaches the poverty line over the medium-term expenditure framework. Parliament must adjust NSFAS, ensure that students also have an increase around CPI in 2026, and that recovers the value lost over the medium-term expenditure framework. We must engage the PIC, CETAs, the National Skills Fund, to take over a share of the public employment programs. Again, many of these institutions have developed both governance and a will of their own, and it's not often aligned to what the broader national objectives are. So they fall under government departments, and they should be brought in line to complement the broader program of ensuring that we roll out more job opportunities for South Africans. There should be an urgent engagement at NEDLAC on the ramped up public employment programs and how we can complement those over the short term. And then we say that specifically there should be an engagement with Treasury on the two-pot reform. There's been some commitments in that respect. We now just have to kick off the actual engagements. Finally, Chair, on the revenue, we welcome the CPI tax bracket relief, the first since 2023. We are shocked by the SARS measly 2% MTF adjustment, and we support the 31 billion GFRECA allocation. The COSATU proposals are as follows. There should be an additional 5 billion rand provided annually for SARS to raise tax compliance to 75% over the MTEF. SARS has been the one institution that covered itself in glory in both delivery and rolling out and governance, and they can make a significant contribution to the fiscus, and we should be ensuring that we support their funding so that they can provide those important services. But to support that program, we must ensure that SARS reports quarterly on tax compliance and illicit goods. Illicit goods remains one of the growing challenges in the economy. Special commissions and committees have been put in place at NEDLAC to engage in it and find solutions to the challenges, but it's a problem that confronts all of us, and it's an area that we have to respond to as part of defending the industrial base of our economy, but also the longer-term viability. Then finally, Chair, we must reduce the tax loopholes for wealthy and large corporations and pursue wealth tax, example on inheritance, estate, and luxury goods. In conclusion, although there are many allocations COSATU is, sorry, excuse me if I can start again, although there are many important allocations that we support as COSATU, there are areas that we continue to be dismayed around, and it seems to us that the bill prioritizes balancing the books at expense of a bold stimulus package to fix the public and municipal services, to spur growth in the economy, to create greater jobs, to provide relief for poor and unemployed, and to ramp up tax compliance. So we needed a bolder benefit. We needed a bolder budget appropriation. If anything, we have no problem in making promises in our country, and I hope it's born out of a deep commitment to fix the social injury of our communities. But that commitment is supported by the efforts of many of our departments. But it is the budget that is the bridge between the promises we make and the actual delivery. So the funding must be allocated to ensure that we're able to roll out many of the promises that we made to our people, some of it an urgent social injury that they have, others more longer term that require systemic systems being built to ensure that we achieve our objectives. We believe that we cannot continue to normalize 1% economic growth in an environment of a 43% unemployment level. Our country is sitting on a powder keg of instability. If we don't respond to these challenges, it can only get worse, and we've seen some of the manifestations thereof in Natal a few years ago. And the urgency with which we must respond is not out of charity for poor communities only, but it must be out of a realization that unless we address these issues, our whole society faces dysfunction and further disintegration. We believe that Parliament should amend the bill to adjust the SRD grants to ensure NSFAS is increased, to ensure that there's funding for SARS, that we respond to many of the economic challenges, greater response to employment programs, deal with SMEs, what are the greater environment that we have now for trade opportunities given the China offer and some of the pressures from the United States. So as we restructure the economy, as we reposition ourselves to differently engage and hopefully have different outcomes on the key indicators out of economic growth and investment in the economy, we believe that can only come about by Parliament taking a decisive step to ensure that we don't only pass this bill, but we make the required adjustments to respond to the needs of our communities. I want to conclude there, Chair, and thank you and the committee for the opportunity to present COSATU's perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ehrenreich. Let me just recognize members who've got questions. Remember, these are questions of clarity. COSATU do not account to this committee. We're here to ask questions of clarity. Honorable Bateman, is there any other member? Honorable Skede. Honorable Bateman, you are
Thanks, Honourable Chair, and good morning to my honourable colleagues and to all of the others here present, and Mr. Ehrenreich for your broad, wide-ranging presentation. Thank you very much. Because it is so wide-ranging, I think something that would be really helpful would be to see what the effects of all of these recommendations are on the actual budget. And so my question is really whether COSATU has costed its proposals and whether COSATU might consider for future presentations actually putting another slide or two together to show what the existing budget is versus what the budget would look like if COSATU were tabling it in the same way, so that we can see, the full picture, the full impact in terms of the revenue and the expenses. So yeah, so there's two questions there. One is, have the recommendations been costed? And the second is, would COSATU consider presenting that information? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Secretary.
No, thank you, Chair. Let me welcome the presentation of COSATU. Chair, I just have 4 questions which I want to ask. With regard to the 10,000 labor inspectors lacking a budget allocation, will these circumstances lead to a delay in the appointment of the MTBPS, which will respond to this need and not delay implementations? The second question is, what is the view of COSATU on the new trading services model, which will likely increase possibilities on enabling private operators and developers to be embedded in key basic service provisions, as the model also allows ring fencing of income to prove bankability? My next question is, what urgent measures are required to stabilize increasingly dysfunctional municipalities, including tackling revenue and expenditure obligations from the perspective of COSATU? And my last question, Chair, is, what is the position of COSATU on recalibrating financial sector asset allocation to increase funding for the non-listed companies, to increase investment in the real economy, and lowering foreign exposure of assets, and increasing allocations for social and economic infrastructure on assets owned by pension funds, insurance, collective investment schemes, and other institutional investors? Isn't this one of the ways to mobilize resources to accelerate economic growth? That's my 4 questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Siate, you were very punctual today. Let's keep it that way with the questions.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks, we'll try. So, mine is more on just trying to get what COSATU would say on giving defense more money. Like, why would we still continue when they currently, on their current funded projects that were found irregular by AGSA? So, for instance, we have your project Gala for the employment of Cuban soldiers at the cost of 180 million. So shouldn't we maybe review on their spending, and why should defense not do the spending reviews where they can prioritize their funding on their constitutional mandate rather than on currently higher expenditure in international travel costs, where there's about 128 million in 2024-25 spent on S&T. So I'm just not sure if putting and pumping more money is going to translate to anything productive. And lastly, maybe how do we then assist departments to really follow on South African laws? Your PFMA, for instance, if they're not held accountable for this. So I'm just not sure if we are pumping more money on them, and this is what we get. And AGSA is also not flagging a lot of irregular expenditures. So that's just my 2 cents there. I hope I was on time.
You are on form today. Let me, I guess my broad reading of the presentation that is tabled before COSATU is increased expenditure on various items. If I was to, And the list is whether Denel, Transnet, labor workers, etc., etc. So I'm not here to debate the merits of each one. I guess my question goes into, particularly on the one instance, the SRD. It is my understanding it'll be taken out in the medium term. So there isn't a long-term view about that. Yet your proposal is to increase it. The second was to look at the question that says, on economic growth activity, because often what you are asking the committee to consider is the increase in funding. The response I get is that the appropriations bill is only about 2.2 trillion rand, or somewhere there, right? Or at least for national departments, SFISO, it'll be 1.1 trillion rand, if I'm not mistaken. 1.2 trillion rand. So that then becomes the envelope within which we operate in this regard. And I totally agree with you. One of the things that, I listened to the debate yesterday, which was really helpful, is that when you peak at debt servicing costs, you create some realization of savings to which you can dispense to expenditure. So for example, this fuel relief has emerged out of a savings of close to about 10 billion rands with the peaking of debt servicing costs. We were able to pump that into that. But that has emerged as a function of what, as per the South African Reserve Bank, pinning inflation target at a particular point. Many of the increases you've raised go above inflation. Does COSATU not fear, an increase into social spending that doesn't always deliver economic reality? I'm not saying you should pick one or two, just I want to hear your view on that. The SRD grant being suspended, and thirdly, any other revenue raising mechanisms that can come on board, because I would think, at least my naive view, is to say it is important for COSATU to see more workers as an argument, an increase in the number of people that get into the workspace. So I want to understand that so that when we deal with the legislation, we can respond to that. And I'm not making any ideological choices. I just want to hear your ways. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and can I also thank all of the committee members for their insightful questions. I have written all of the questions down, so if I don't respond to all of them in complete detail, I'm happy to provide written responses after consultation with Comrade Matthew. But let me start by the first question that was raised in respect of, have we costed the measures that we're proposing? That's exactly, I think, the criticism that we have. We should not be saying what is the funds that we have and how do we deploy them. We should be scoping what is the problem in our country, what do we need to respond to, then decide what the kind of funding allocations are that requires to that. And that may even mean additional taxes. We talk in our presentation about taxes on inheritance and other stuff that can be increased, but that may mean all of those issues. But it's a different approach to the budget first. It's about deciding what it is we need, because when we exclude any program, it does exclude services to basic people. For example, the number of public services now, there's always been a claim that the public service levels are too high. They've certainly declined relative to the amount of the population that they serve, because we haven't kept up with the employment numbers. So in that respect, services are down already. And whether it's in health institutions, in education institutions, or in the policing, we can see the consequences thereof on society. Reading for comprehension at level 4, many, many challenges. The safety situation in our communities, clearly parliamentarians understand and appreciate the safety. In fact, they've given themselves 4 billion rand to respond to the safety crisis, while the poorer communities are facing circumstances.
Can I defend this point a little bit? I totally agree with you, by the way. But I think, as my friends in the Eastern Cape keep saying, I don't want to disrupt this, we mustn't cry at the wrong funeral. There's an executive allocation of VIP protection at 4 billion rands. It doesn't extend to members of parliament. So I think you'll find in the room there are people who are on your side of the argument, because we see the blue light brigade on the other side, and we raise similar concern.
Well, I'm encouraged by that because I think it sets in place an important principle and a precedent that we can apply elsewhere. The parliamentarians, when they come here, they have their budgets and their diets and their transport, all is taken care of. When my members have to go and work wherever they go and work, none of those instances are in place. Metro rail's not running, they get shot in the taxis. So the point that we're trying to stress as COSATU is that we must respond to the social challenges with the budget, and we mustn't say we've got the following envelope and hence we're going to cut and paste depending on what we deem to be priorities. I appreciate that we can't respond to everything, but I do think that there are clear signals that are being sent by social partners on what it is that is required. So if the presidency must be checked about their VIP protection, then so be it. But we've got to allocate the resources more strategically to have the greatest social impact. We're happy, and we know that there are mechanisms within the budget that has the capacity, within the budget office here, that has the capacity to cost additional expenses. But we also have organizations that we work with so can happily do a costing if that's an area of discussion that could productively take us forward. But we're not opposed to that. Our biggest concern is that if we don't respond to the numbers, if we don't undo the challenges that we have, it's just going to get deeper as we proceed. On the question of the labor inspectors, absolutely. There was a promise, a specific undertaken given in the State of the Nation address that has not reflected in the budget. Now, surely the architecture of setting in place legislation and the process in government means that what the president signals, the ministries must then make sure that they are able to execute. The key determinant to execution is the funds that are allocated to that, these budget allocations. So if we haven't put in place those inspectors that we promised we would for very real problems that existed in the labor market, we can only assume that those problems are going to continue and that the undertakings that the president gives appears to have very little influence on what the ministry then finally brings for consideration. On the new trading services model and the municipal funding crisis and then financial investments, we'd happily agree at looking at issues around the pension fund assets. How do we invest that more productively, and how do we ensure that we're able to respond to the challenges? But there's a variety of ways in which we should be having deeper conversations. Remember, I think 3 years ago, we didn't look at the GFRAC as an area that we could be drilling into and an area we should be also developing that surplus in. But that's an additional quiver in bow in our quiver that can help us to respond to many of the financial challenges that we have. I absolutely agree with the colleague in the front who says that the amount of money we're spending on travel, the money giving to the Cubans, all of the allocations must be measured against what their social benefit is. But we've got to look at what the social benefit is through a broader lens. We might not have been sitting here today in our democracy discussing these matters if the Cubans hadn't paid for their blood to liberate the continent. So we think we have to have a more balanced response to what we do to those things. You don't reject people after they've assisted you. And there's got to be a way in which we can reciprocate that in a way that's reflected of the public values and the ethics that we hold as a society. So happily to relook at many of those issues, but it's got to be done in a way that's mindful of what the support and the opportunities was for South Africans and for the continent as a whole. Chair, the points that you've raised are absolutely important, and the funding-related issues, we can happily have a discussion on that. The fuel levy and why we support and would want to see that remain in place, because the rising cost of fuel immediately translates into rising cost of foodstuff, and that just has an inflationary effect across the economy. So if you can constrain the increases in fuel, you're able to at least hold back some of those inflationary pressures. So we think that's important relief. The fact that it comes from the debt servicing cost, I mean, we have exorbitant debt servicing cost in our budget, and we've got to look at a different way. And we've got to look at all of the features that has contributed to that. Some of it is linked to the old odious debt discussions that we held. We now ending up paying for the bullets that shot our people during the days of apartheid. And maybe there's a need to have that discussion again, because it's such a constraining factor on our ability to direct the society out of the crisis and lack of clear momentum that we have, that it's an important discussion that must be had. I mean, we're now talking about the SRD grants that is going to stop during the medium-term expenditure framework. Unemployment's getting worse, but we're stopping the support for unemployment. There's a logic there that our people in our country is not going to look at very favorably. As their social challenges become worse, surely our response must become more deliberate to help them out of these challenges. And you can only imagine that with AI and its effect on the economy continuing to get more and more profound, that we're going to have greater levels of unemployment. So instead of cutting back on social welfare systems, we should be having a more coherent discussion about what are the social welfare systems we require to create an environment and a society where people are not as stressed and fractured as they are now, but that there's some support from the state as economies restructure. But what we found in all the major restructuring moments of an economy, and this is a feature of most industrial economies, is that the workers alone and the working class alone bear the cost of that. Lost unemployment, problems with just getting our products from port to port, all of the issues that we see in our economy at the moment are areas that we've got to respond to more effectively, but we've got to ensure that we have some latitude around the finances to manage those transitions. At the moment, it seems that even though we commit to not taking ideological stances, this seems to be an ideological stance. When there's a commitment to cut the budget on such an important area for no good reason that we can understand, other than the budget, growth deficit targets must be met, even if that's at variance with what the interest of our constituencies are. Chair, I hope I've been able to respond to the questions as best as I could, but happy to give an elaboration in writing if so required. Thank you.
No, thank you very much to Kosatu. Where we go from here is, of course, this goes into, we're putting together the report and recommendations for the National Assembly to consider in the light of that. And then, of course, what happens post facto is that in the medium-term budget policy statement, the Minister of Finance has to respond to some of the questions that you put forward. So I want to thank you for that. I look at your conclusions with great interest. Bold stimulus package. I think you made a very important remark about we maybe should not look at the envelope as we have it. We should look at. Oh, sorry. Oh, Honorable Bateman, you wanted to say something?
Thanks, Chair. I don't mean to interrupt you because you're in a flow, but I would appreciate the opportunity to respond.
No. Yeah, we're gonna move because it's 10 o'clock, so I want to try and get on to the next one. So all I was just trying to say is the great difficulty is that I take your point about we need to think about the spending envelope with our objectives in mind rather than this is our current reality, therefore this is how we go. In looking at the recommendations, that's the work that we've got to do. Honorable Bateman, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I know you've expressed the desire to move on quickly, but I do think that some of the points that Mr. Ehrenreich are raising are very important, and I would really appreciate the opportunity to give a 2-minute response, if I may.
Can I give you 1 minute? Can we bargain?
Of course, Chair. You're the Chair.
Let's go. 1 minute. You have 1 minute and let's go.
2 points of agreement. Agree with the need to cut waste and reallocate between priorities. And you mentioned the situation of the VIP protection, which is a great example. Agree with the concern that many government services are underfunded. Disagree with the spend and tax approach. And the reason why I say that is because I recently asked our Minister of Finance if he could give us an example of another country that has such high levels of tax on corporate profit and distributed profits, and also has high levels of sustained investment and growth, and he couldn't name such a country. And so tax rates affect investment, and also debt is a problem because that's the other way of funding it, the risk of default, interest costs crowding out other priorities, and also pushing up the cost of capital. So when investment is low, and that's the key thing that holds back our growth, gross fixed capital formation, then you see lower economic growth, and then you see lower tax revenues and lower employment. So all of these things are connected, and that's why I'm challenging that mindset that you can just spend and then figure out where the money's going to come from. We have to look at what are the drivers of investment, because that's going to be the driver of continued, sustained, growing tax revenues. And that growing tax revenue is what's necessary to fund our social program. So that's just where I would say, two things I agree with you strongly, but on the spend and tax approach, I have to agree to disagree. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I don't think you need to respond to that, if that's okay. Otherwise, we'll get into an economics debate. And as Tony said to me earlier on, he said, look, it's the clever man knows many options. It's the wise man who finds the way to socialism. So he will argue socialism. You will argue a different point of view. So I'm careful not to get into that debate, because I can see the way it's going. You know, others say when you spend more, you increase economic activity, and others would argue that actually when you do less of that and do other things, then you could grow economy. So I don't want to get into the two debates. So if that's okay, I appreciate the presentation today. Thank you so much. And I want to especially express my appreciation to COSATU. COSATU have been very diligent in making submissions to all pieces of legislation that we have, and I want to appreciate that. I really do. I think it's members of COSATU ought to get the feedback that they are well represented. And so if you can convey my thanks also to Mr. Parks, I would appreciate that. We're going to move on to the South African Human Rights Commission. They will next present in this regard. And so, Advocate, the presentation has been sent, as Pumlanim Sibi would say, your 15 minutes starts now.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, members. I would like just to state that I will not be taking the 15 minutes. I will just also maybe take 10 minutes of the allocated time. In terms of the presentation, in terms of the first slide, it's usually our introduction and the mandate of the Commission. This is just to remind the members of the public who the Commission is and what is our mandate and where we find it in terms of the Constitution and the Act. So I will not ponder on that. That is just common knowledge. I will then speak about the Human Rights Commission as well as the focal area that I'm responsible for, where that we refer to as pro-human rights budgeting, is to remind those who are responsible for budgeting in terms of what equitable share looks like and what we have noted in terms of our monitoring exercise. We looked at our 2012 Section 184 report, and we identified 4 impediments that compromise access, enjoyment, and the fulfillment of socio-economic rights in South Africa. The first is the social exclusion of the poor and vulnerable groups. That was listed as the first one. This critical finding is consistent with subsequent reports by the Commission, but also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the International Convent on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It cannot be understated that budgets and government spending are central to the realization of rights, and this is something that the representative for COSATU said. Budgets are a bridge. They're a bridge in terms of our constitutional promise to our people, as well as the realization on the ground. This is coupled with the cross-cutting effects of pro-human rights budgeting that has on fundamental rights, good governance, service delivery, and the most important elephant that we always speak about, the issue of corruption and anti-corruption in South Africa. Put differently, the pro-human rights budgeting is critical to the prioritization and the balancing of rights in the Bill of Rights, therefore ensuring that the poor and marginalized are equitably provided for. We've noted in terms of our monitoring exercise that often your CFOs, municipal managers, and the IDP process ignores the inputs of the most marginalized and poor communities. This is because this is done when they are at work, when they are unavailable, and in areas where they cannot adequately participate in this process. To this effect, the Commission sees it fit to add its voice and make submissions to the 2026 Appropriation Bill before the Standing Committee. The Commission is particularly mindful of Section 214, subsection 1A of the Constitution, which requires an act of parliament provide for equitable division of revenue raised nationally amongst the national, provincial, and local spheres of government. Regarding Schedule 1 of the 2026 Appropriation Bill, particularly allocation for corporate governance at a local government equitable share, the Commission is of the view that this allocation ought to be targeted to cater for the poorest provinces and municipalities with the aim to cater for the most marginalized, the provision of services such as education, healthcare, water, and social protection for marginalized communities. We relied on the South African Statistics South Africa's poverty trends in South Africa, which examined the absolute poverty between 2006 and 2023 report. The provinces with the highest levels of poverty are KZN, Eastern Cape, Northwest, and Limpopo, and they continue to experience the highest poverty headcounts, irrespective of the poverty line applied. Collectively, these provinces home about nearly 60% of South Africa's poorest of the poor in 2023, with KZN alone accounting for about 1 in 4 per households. According to Stats SA, persistent disparities were observed, with poverty disproportionately affecting children, Black, Africans, females, and those living in rural areas, particularly in provinces such as KZN, Northwest, Limpopo, and Eastern Cape. These disparities point to the need for a more targeted and redistributive fiscal approach. Mindful of these considerations, the Commission convened a dialogue on Indaba on the realization of socioeconomic rights through pro-human rights budgeting and the equitable share. Chairperson, you recall that my office did send an invitation just to also have the voice of the Standing Committee participate in that, but also draw on members of the public as well as those who were in the room. And it's quite important that we had one of the MECs from KZN who stated that we really need those who are in government, MECs, mayors, to then just drive that Corolla. It's not important for us to drive very fancy cars while the poorest of the poor are suffering. So this idea that if you are in government, you need to drive a fancy car, a Suzuki is okay. I'm not advocating for it, but right now we need to think like that and work towards that. I'm not advertising, but I think it's important for this conversation. And part of the endeavor sought to address fiscal-related barriers to the South African constitutional framework, which obliges the state to take progressive measures to realize socioeconomic rights such as housing, education, healthcare, water, and social security. And I think that is what we're trying to do, that what we see is this misalignment. CFOs are about, at the end of the day, I need to either save money or make money for that particular municipalities. Human rights defenders and those who are in the room often say, how do we then realize human rights? And we need to then have a conversation of bringing these two conversations together. Although the report and the outcomes of the endeavor are still being considered and will be shared, it has since become clear that budgets must cater for the poorest and the most marginalized. The endeavor made clear that equitable share must be administered in a manner that is fair and just, that allocation should target poor households and under-resourced municipalities, underscoring the need to strengthen and enhance the redistributive potential of the equitable share framework. We're not also denying the fact that municipalities are unable to spend the allocated grants or funds due to the lack of expertise. We're also proposing that we provide that expertise and that support to ensure that those who are given the budget understand how to spend it. And often what we've also received is that because of the lack of expertise, they are unable to spend the grant because they don't fully understand the grant conditions, or alternatively result in irregular expenditure because they're taking from the grant without meeting those grant conditions. Furthermore, it was evident from the endeavor that the equitable share formula must be more deliberately oriented towards improving the quality and accessibility of service delivery, with particular focus on indigent population. This includes but is not limited to persons with disabilities, the Khoisan San, older persons, women, rural communities who continue to face systematic barriers in accessing basic services. The Commission will endeavor to ensure that the developed outcomes on the Indaba are finalized, convene further discussions, and with leave of the committee, we will then share same with yourselves as well as the National Assembly for further deliberations. In conclusion, considering the above, the Commission calls for a more targeted, equitable, human rights-based approach to budget allocation under the 2026 Appropriation Bill framework. Such an approach must be responsive to demographic realities, socioeconomic disparities, with clear and deliberate emphasis on prioritizing the needs of the poor and marginalized. We'd like to thank the chairperson as well as members of the committee for, again, allowing the Commission to make its submissions. Thank you, Chair.
And you've upheld your right to use 10 minutes. So I appreciate that. Let me recognize certain members, some members. Honorable Sigede, and then who else is wanting to make a submission? Honorable Kalaga Mazibubu.
No, Chair, I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just thinking. I'm a director at the municipality. I get car allowance. I'm driving SUVs. But when it comes to politicians, they must drive Corollas. It's only what I want to say. Thank you.
But Suzuki, to be specific. But Honorable Segeda, I would be careful in a public hearing to make a cogent case for Germans' SUVs. Honorable Kalega Mazuku.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Maybe to pick up from Honorable Sigede, poverty is a challenge in the country. Poverty, inequality is a serious challenge. And I don't think at the Indaba we can reduce alleviation of poverty to what type of a car is a person driving. I don't think we can reduce it to that, but we can come together, put our heads together and say how we can contribute to government's plan of poverty alleviation, because it is one of the priorities of government to deal with issues of inequality, poverty and all that. So how best as a Human Rights Commission and people in government can intervene and assist government in alleviating poverty. And my question, Chair, is with regard to the local government white paper process, noting the findings of the Indaba you spoke about that you held. What are the proposals of Human Rights Commission with regard to the local government fiscal framework, and how can local government contribute to the problems you have identified in the presentation? And maybe, Chair, maybe not in this platform, because here we are mainly concentrating on the appropriations bill presentations. Maybe we'll find another platform. I have some questions for human rights, especially when it comes to defending the rights of the society. I can make an example. When I was in Johannesburg, we identified dilapidated buildings, and we said people cannot live in those buildings. So in our endeavor to try and make sure that people don't occupy those buildings, Human Rights Commission, sometimes they will take government to court for the rights of shelter for the people. then people live in those buildings, and something happens in the building. Maybe the building burns down, or whatever happens. Then the very same human rights blames government. So maybe those are the discussions for another time. I need to understand more as to at what point and how do we balance the things. But yeah, that was my question based on today's presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I did sincerely apologize for not making the Indaba because I think I was out the country, if I remember the timing thereof. But that doesn't diminish my support for the work that you do. The questions I have is I'm looking at your recommendations and I want to understand, what if I made a counter argument that said, actually, government could pat itself on the head and say, this one we are doing. So let me take a targeted allocation framework. The government could comfortably say that in the PES and the municipal equitable share formula, there is embedded in there, not only do we measure population, but we deal with the question of indigence. And so in that regard, we do have some target. What if they made the point to say on equitable and redistributive budgeting, the same argument could be held. We've got formulas that do this. You don't like the formula, change the formula, but the thinking is there. A greater support for poor and marginalized communities. The state would simply say, well, we spend 62% of our budget on the social wage. Do you want to spike that up, or what do you want us to do? If you want us to get to 70% of the social wage, is that the proposal? So, and then the last is a revenue allocation aligned to demographic and socioeconomic realities. Both those things are embedded in principle in how the equitable share formula, etc., is put on the table. So I guess my question is, how do you counter the view that says we are doing it? We maybe are not implementing it properly, that's a different debate. But the point is the thinking is there. When the budget is tabled, the Minister of Finance comfortably says, this is a pro-poor budget. Even that statement has its own contradictions, but he says pro-poor. We've done everything we can. We've curbed inflation to Mr. Ehrenreich's presentation. When it came to cuts on increase in fuel, we've done the work. When it comes to, we are there. We may not do enough, but we do sufficiently. The people who could complain are those who are middle income earners. They could say, you do little for us, because they experience cuts. They go, well, I send my kids to an X Model C school, you've cut allocation towards that. So frankly, you are not pro-middle class. That's the discriminator. So I want to understand your response to your recommendations. The second point I'd want to understand is, I think it was Kara Asma who made the proposal about enjoining Chapter 9 institutions to be funded better. That, of course, I appreciate it's got a constitutional amendment to the issue. But I raised the question because, to Honorable Gallagher Mazibugo's question, dissuade me from this statement. All the Human Rights Commission does is genuinely bark, but invariably it does not bite. So you can tell me all day long that I'm in violation of rights, but I can just ignore you. The public protector has got a different role. Of course, on that instance, remedial actions are binding in this regard. But I find, unless you go to courts and a clogged up court system, I could fail to provide a school for children, and that's all there is. And then linked maybe to my earlier point, I do want to say this. There's been enough people who argue for zero-based budgeting, but in the main, the constitutional imperatives are embedded in our budget. So if you say, so already, I think conservatively speaking, 70% of our budget is already accounted for before you even wake up and think about anything else, especially in the appropriations bill. Because in truth, I could say healthcare is there, education is there, safety is there. They are all budgeted for. Maybe not enough, but they are all done there. So to say we're not budgeting for human rights may not necessarily, the state could have a cogent case to defend when it goes to court. So I want to hear your counter arguments, because I want to support your recommendation. If I wanted to support your recommendations, where do I come from? Thanks. And just for record, I'm not here to argue with an advocate.
I'm not here as an advocate, I'm here as a commissioner. If I was here as an advocate, I'd say, as the court pleases, my lord. But I-
To quote Julius Mkwanas, you are helping me, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. I think it's important that the analogy that I gave about the cause is not to say that that is how we are going to alleviate poverty. It was just a remark that was made by the MEC that we should be focusing on poverty alleviation and not on certain lifestyles. So that's the part. But I think the Indaba spoke broadly about the CFO's positions, municipal managers, MECs. It was to change the formula. The formula exists, but it's not the lens of how the formula is enforced and interpreted is from a CFO's perspective. It's not from a human rights perspective. And that is where the issue is. The formula exists, but how we look at it is how we need to change it. CFOs, at the end of the day, they will look at the formula and they say the formula does not really meet my needs as a CFO. So we're having conversations with CFOs to see how we can change the formula. In terms of, I'm going to start with the issue of the Human Rights Commission is, it barks but has no bite. And I think that's the conversation that the Commission has been having in terms of our powers. The Constitutional Court essentially said we only have soft powers, but not remedial action as the public protector. But the Human Rights Commission relies on its other powers, the powers to subpoena, its soft powers coming before Parliament, making reports to Parliament. But we're also working towards having a bit more bite. And we hope that once we get there, we're able to then fulfill our constitutional mandate. A lot of South Africans, when we do have these inquiries in terms of municipalities, they're able to adhere to our recommendations, but not all the time. So we're not a pit bull, if I can give the analogy, like the public protector. We are sort of like a burrable, soft, but then we are able to then, implement it. And unfortunately, we can't rely on courts. As you say, they're overwhelmed. We rely on our soft powers. In terms of what we do when it comes to housing issues, the issue is how evictions are conducted. Is it in terms of the law? Has the municipality or the government agency then offered alternative housing? The concern is you can't evict people. Where do they go? So it's that provision of alternative housing and evictions done in terms of the law and in respect of human rights. In terms of the aspect that the government can say, we've exactly in terms of the Human Rights Commission's recommendations, we've adhered to it. We say they have not essentially adhered to it. We see the collapsing health system. If really essentially there was a targeted approach to the budget, we would then be seeing a functioning healthcare system. We're not. We're seeing high levels of unemployment in terms of the doctors and nurses, which is not translated into service delivery. You walk into a hospital, you monitor, you ask the CEO of the hospital, how high are your vacancy rates? And they'll tell you that I'm sitting at 50% vacancy rates in provinces such as Limpopo. You can imagine how that then translates to service delivery. In terms of aspects such as, if we are having a targeted approach in terms of the education, basic education, you would see asbestos issues being at schools being dealt with quite deliberately, and not just this whole idea that we've given the Department of Education resource allocation. We would see that in terms of the pit lavatories that we still haven't, as the Commission, when we look at it, they have not been adequately dealt with. And when we write to these respective departments, Chair, the responses are always the same. We do not have enough budget. We did it last year with the Department of Health. The response was, we'd love to do this, but we don't have the necessary budget. In terms of our inputs to the white paper, we issued a media report statement. We are working collectively as commissioners, my office and Commissioner Boshov's office, who is responsible on issues of municipalities. We have made comments. We are aware of the various challenges affecting local spheres of government, such and various engagements. We've noted that it speaks to aging infrastructure, high water losses, inability to attract and maintain technical skills, the lack of revenue, the high levels of poverty and indigency, the grading of municipalities, the funding model, the adequateness of media. We've made written submissions in this respect and will continue through respective engagements to use our soft law approach to ensuring that these amendments are effected.
I would argue we need a pit bull as a South African Human Rights Commission. I hope we can get that right. Because
Chair, we are working to becoming the pit bull, and we hope, and this is an emphasis, that those who hold power in government, and when they're making media statements, emphasize the importance of the Human Rights Commission. We're not supposed to be the most favored Chapter 9 institution, given how broad our mandate is. Once we become liked, Chair, you can rest assured we've not done our work.
no, I mean, and certainly you're speaking to one who's on the side of the argument of to how do we build institutional capacity for strengthening of human rights. I think what's going to be very fascinating to me in answer to your question, and that maybe would have been, is in part some of the submission I'd make to the Indaba, is to say at which point is the right met or not met. Because certain rights are progressive, naturally, and other rights are assessed differently. So the Minister of Education, if she was here and you said to her, you talk asbestos and pit latrines, she says, my first priority was to make sure 98% of the children go to school. We've hit that target. Now we'll deal with the other things, but we've hit the right to access to education. You talk about healthcare provision. Yeah, sure. It is a measure as to what is the ratio of doctor to patient and what is the ratio of nurse to patient. Fair debate. But you must tell us at which point is the right threshold. So I do think that becomes this, I don't want to get into a circuitous argument. I'm just trying to, drill down on when you say a right has been met and not met, perhaps what criterion that could be used. And it's an honest question. I don't delve into it, but I appreciate your insights. Thank you so much. Let's move on to then the third. Oh, sorry, Honorable Secretary. We've dealt with the car issue. I think the Human Rights Commission is going to charge you for demanding an SUV.
Some rural provinces, such as Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Northwest, experience some improvement in employment rates. But my question is, what redistributive mechanisms are required for spatial transformation and to deal with poverty trends in KZN, Eastern Cape, Northwest, and Limpopo? That's my only question, sir. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Secretary. Do you have a 1-minute response to the point? I mean, it's a full question, and we're getting to the next presentation.
May I perhaps ask for an opportunity to reply in writing, given the fact that we've had in conversations with the MEC of Finance in KZN in this respect?
That'd be super. Thank you. On another day, we can discuss federalization of the budget, because you're talking to the MEC of the MECs in provinces. MECs in provinces do their own thing. And when they don't meet their respective right, as it were, the national government cannot intervene. Kom hell of war water. So if the MEC for Health does not produce enough hospitals, the national government can't wake up in the morning and say, we're going to bail it out or do something else. It's a
As we've seen with the issues of water challenges, that conversation, we would also perhaps, we are going to continue having these, we're no longer going to call it the Ndaba, it's called the People's Budget. We will then be inviting members of the Standing Committee to make submissions in terms of how the People's Budget needs to look like, and we do invite ordinary South Africans to participate in that process.
we will come there and doi. I recognize the next organization, the PAIFS, led by Professor Yankees. We all know Professor Yankees. So I hand over to you, sir. Your 15 minutes begins now. In a different capacity. I didn't want to raise issues of the past. It's a bit like, what's the name? Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I think they've been divorced for a while, but it's still. Anyways, over to you.
No, thank you so much, Chair, and good morning to members and colleagues in the platform. It's good to be here. Look, I think the opportunity is really appreciated in this regard. The Pan-African Institute for Fiscal and Policy Studies present a very structural analysis of the budget itself. We'd really try to provide more of a, insights that really provide practical solutions, particularly to empower committee to fulfill its mandate. The outline, I said I'll guide you, okay, sorry. The outline really today in our presentation follows a very rigorous logical process that you'll see. First, look at how the macroeconomic landscape has shifted drastically since the budget was presented, as the colleague from COSAT noted. But also now present sort of what I call it, an audit for what has happened over the year that has passed, but also unpacking our proprietary analytical framework, which really allows us to dive deeper into different entities' performance stress tests in terms of what is the structure of these entities and how are they able to use the budget to transform our economy and society in that regard. So that's really our outline. Yeah, next slide. So the core here of the institute is really to bridge the gap between the complex economic work and more practical, localized policy implementation strategy. And I feel my view, I said this before, members will remember, this committee has a very unique, empowered by the Act. You do not just have to rubber stamp the allocations, but in my view, you have the legal power to transform the society, the economy, and the public finance through the interventions of the budget you make. So I still hold that view. The goal here is for the presentation to showcase how to move the oversight model, or how to contribute to moving the oversight model from the backward-looking, post-mortem financial audit sort of to be more of a predictive and outcome-based oversight framework. So we'll try to test this model. Hopefully the committee will find it very useful to be more about predictive, thank you, a way of oversight, which I feel that is what the law empowers you to do. I must really, Chair, start by really confronting an uncomfortable truth, the fact that when the bill was drafted, presented as a recovery baseline, that has since been completely overtaken by hostile global and domestic realities. And you see what has been happening over time. The baseline is structurally dead, really, which we had earlier on. You see that the GDP has flatlined at 1% due to, in part, debates, supply side issues, but I still think there's a lot of demand side stuff that are leading to lack of growth. Top line tax revenue will miss an optimistic 2% federal target that we set clearly. We'll also remember there's been fuel relief measures that were put out. So in a way, Chair and members, passing this bill without recognition of the reality that we're in is planning for an economic context that no longer exists in a way. So there has to be that realization in that regard. When you closely look at the Q1 data shock, call it data shock. Clearly, we've shared quite a lot of jobs in the first quarter, driving our official unemployment to about 32.7% or so, 32.7%, you've seen that. Yes, the March inflation, headline inflation cooled down to 3.1%, but you know, it's quite worrying for me that we'll see this as structural victory, particularly when you think about how this really talks about the demand paradox that we have in this country, particularly in driving the economy. Inflation is cooling because households are broke. You know, the lack of disposable income to sustain consumption economy. That's why it has cooled down. And I don't know if that's what we want. I don't think so. This job loss strain really we see impacting provincial budgets as hundreds of households move into indigent registers, threatening the issues of unauthorized shift to capital spending as we've seen over time, which forces the operational emergency relief in that regard. So there's really a picture that is shifted, and we have to see this bill more as an intervention rather than as a recovery measures, and I think the committee should use its authority to do that. So what do we have here, which again I said is very nicely following through on each other after looking at what's happened. For me, it's always important to look back where we come from and what have we achieved, and I feel a lot of times our budget process doesn't always do that, which it's bizarre for me, but I think it's very crucial that we look at this matrix where, you know, the process to say, because this, in our analytical framework, it's sort of a credibility deflator to say, if you have an entity or department that requires more funding, but we look at what happened before, they fail to realize their contribution to broader economic performances, then that has to be seen as a credibility deflector in particular. In contrast, the state's commitments against the targets for last year, you do see, as I mentioned earlier on, we've missed 2% targets to land at 1%. Unemployment we see has worsened rather than what we wanted to achieve. And also the upper bound poverty expand beyond what we were expected or were targeting. This empirical divergence, Chair and members, proves that our fiscal transmission mechanism is broken, really. The committee must make sure that the appropriating more capital, more spending in the system will lead to buying more different things rather than leading to the same thing. So it must be fixed, Chairperson, and this committee has a role to play in that regard. That's my argument. The next slide. In the next slide, I do share the tool that we're trying to develop, we've been developing over time, which I find useful, which really, I call it the National Budget Alignment and Macro-Fiscal Impact Index. So it uses a rigorous weighted approach to measure dynamic public value within the department. We're setting a score at a certain level. Let me explain this equation simply. We look at the alignment, the MTDP itself within the entity, which counts for quite a bigger weight, 40% of that, to ensure that the money matches our priorities. You know, it's very crucial for state budget to be in line with that. And then we also look at a macro impact, macro fiscal impact, where to see if this budget creates real localized jobs, or what is the impact of budget in particular within the localized area, wherever the money will be spent. And the third is your NDP realization. Okay, looking back as well, bringing into this, to look at long-term transmission or transformation that the budget should. And lastly, the issue of efficiency, which account for a slight bit, but it's a very crucial part of the formula thereof. This framework is a very comprehensive, what I call comprehensive health check for public funds. It moves, in my view, could move the committee away from simply tracking whether money was spent legally, focusing instead of what structural fiscal value is actually by this within our economy. Chair, to make this daily, the formula, the analytic model to daily fully accessible for upcoming budget votes of what we're doing now, we break this model into those 4 components. Firstly, look at the macro fiscal multiplier, where we say This is simply measure on how the economy bank, our committees get from the simply tax that spend. Spending shouldn't be passive, expensive. It must act as a investment that grows a localized economy. So we further track the employment, meaning how many local youth are absorbed into real jobs for every 10 million spent, and also it tracks the issues of capital fiscalization, the investment which measures if the money is building physical infrastructure like rural roads, real corridors, and clinics and so on. So that multiplier is very crucial. So in our view, that has to be assessed in the spending of particular entity in that regard. And secondly, strategic alignment. This tests if the department's budget actually maps out into the National Development Plan, or if it is operating in isolated silo vacuum. You'll see in one of the departments, you see some of those continue to work in silo, which makes the realization of these higher priorities more difficult because there's lack of that working together. That evaluate the cross-section, yes, as I mentioned, it evaluates the cross-sectional integration and spatial targeting accuracy to make sure capital isn't wasted in that regard, particularly around capital spending in that regard. Third component of the matrix looks at the allocation efficiency. This looks at internal balance of the budget. Is the money stuck at the head office, or is reaching the frontline services? We'll see in health now. We look at the core to administration ratio, cost of employee density, to see if we are paying for frontline service or top-heavy management bureaucracy. And the environment frequency as well, how is the frequency, which flags how often departments secretly shift money in a mid-year away from infrastructure to some of the areas that are short in overheads in the department. That's the third one. That's how those components looks at allocation efficiency in particular. The final component of the matrix there deal with implementation capacity. This evaluates the institutional health to execute the plans, which is one of the bigger issues when you look at the analysis there. A brilliant policy backed by billions is useless if governance is broken. We track consecutive verification outcomes, consequence management, and actual reduction of irregular expenditure over time. Crucially, the audit credibility deflect that the thing integrates past delivery failures directly into the current scores in that regard. When you go to the next slide, in applying all that analytical formula, you do say that. So I forgot to mention, when we looked at the entities, we looked at the entities that the committee has selected for the term. So we look at those. I know in your program you had some entities that you are looking at, so we analyzed those purely for this bill this time around. Next slide.
Okay, I want to conscientize you of time.
Of time.
So yeah, so just you got to keep going because it's
Okay.
you've had.
I'll move fast.
Yeah.
I'm quite far. All right. Let's, when you look at these entities, you do see that these are top performing entities in the list, which are, we look at Treasury there, we stress test the outcome. And while these entities show high institutional alignment, their efficiency and capacity scores are heavily constrained. Our core directive to the Treasury is clear. It must transform from passive financial allocator, but more to sort of enforce proper spending or allocation lines with the Section 216 of the Constitution. Next slide. I'm going to just pick up my legs. This is the most important part of the presentation. Of course, when you look at the why do these departments in the top tier health and higher education represent vital developmental expenditure, health generates higher frontline employment and injects localized wage demand into townships and rural economies via community health workers, and higher education makes investment into youth policy capacity. However, they face serious internal blockage within the system. Health experience massive efficiency leaks through mediocre legal claims and administration bloated. Home affairs modernization lowers the frictional cost of business, but its implementation remains vulnerable to SITA downtime and its tech spending continuously bypass the local software as well. Next slide. We look at the vulnerable group. Out of that, your transport Start with the transport and plaza, which scores quite a low in the mid group. A functional rail and logistic network is ultimately important economic multiplier. It lowers labor mobility costs and reduces industrial premiums. So the transport hold higher theoretical multiplier potential of 8, but this neutralized by implementation capacity scores very, very low. So infrastructure project collapse into rollover traps in the sector where capital intended for rail corridors is repeatedly shifted path to patch the operational shortfall. The last bit, the middle, okay, still is the middle tie again. When you look at the sub scores, high on policy alignment, but its core to administration spending ratio is broken it's quite disappointing. The budget is overwhelmingly consumed by top-heavy compensation of footprint at head office, starving the physical frontline services there. Rural development, again, you do see that suffers from severe spiral fiscal mismatch. Building agrarian infrastructure in deep rural zones experience high migration, which really is a bit of a mismatch, creating dead assets without post-settlement industrialization. So that, again, it talks to your efficiency there. Meanwhile, cohort on the other side shows total collapse in, the scoring of cohort shows really the issues faced by the fiscal, municipal fiscal collapse, where national conditional grants are swallowed within a system that is not functioning. The last group, which is your critical, the Department of Finance lands a critical score, quite a lower score, spending. There should ideally serve as a massive incubator for advanced domestic manufacture, but also technology advancement is very crucial to play. When we look at international benchmarking, defense, that's where many instances technology advancements and innovation comes in. Instead, the department suffers from a catastrophic procurement multiplier failures. The budget is entirely paralyzed by personal costs, starving capital procurement. As a result, state frequently bypass domestic capacity, import equipment while leaving our own state-owned manufacturing assets like Denel starved of sustainable order in that regard. And again, look at the Denel and SAA, which are in a critical fiscal sinkhole. I think we've seen that, many have said it, but I think to highlight it is the issue of allocated efficiency in the system sitting at below 2 scores there. Capital appropriated here contributes absolutely zero to localized growth or broad-based public employment. It serves purely to a passive debt savings bailout. I think we urge the committee to institute a very strict zero bailout without multiplier policy. My MTF baselines from these entities must be blocked unless accompanied by legal binding commercial turnaround strategy in that regard. There are recommendations, we move to the next slide, which go deeper where we do say that the National Treasury, one of the important entities, must be mandated to transform from really more of a passive allocator to active enforcer by withholding some of the spending if it doesn't comply with the entities, and I think this committee should empower them. Secondly, for transport, we must halt lump sum transfers for price. Subsequent trenches must be conditioned quarterly based on a very verifiable assets fiscal milestones. The third, look at personnel reforms. We must statutorily ring-fence health personnel budget to prevent moving funds away from frontline clinical staff to head office supporting. That has to be looked into. The growth of spending, as you say in Chaelo, should be more about frontline services as opposed to that largely bloated there. The next slide, which is probably last, I'm going to say last. Under the localization, we must ring-fence, when you're looking at the bill, must ring-fence a binding percentage for defense modernization budgets exclusively for Denel and domestic supply to build localized industry capacity. There has to be a pipeline built over time. It cannot wait. We need to ensure that spending supports it. For Home Affairs, we must mandate strict local content rules to use South African software engineering, for example. I don't know how far that is, but there has to be some way of recognizing the importance of using the budget to support growth in the sectors. For cross-sectoral alignment, DHET, TVET, grants must be tied to state industrial needs, forcing them to align curricula with transport and defense and some of the southern. And the land budget must only be realized when direct integrated into youth operate aggregate process hub for avoiding creating dead assets in particular. So that's in a sense what you say, To conclude, let's summarize the macro fiscal reality. As we say, we do say the audit combined with the actions for the first term confirms that our budget is trapped in a cycle of administrative maintenance, ensure that the infrastructure capital injection are yielding economic multiplier to avoid simply subsidizing institutional dysfunction. Baseline assumptions are obsolete that we've had, definitely. So we are fighting a May crisis or June crisis with an outdated February playbook there. A deep dive confirms structural bottlenecks dictate economic outcomes far more than top-line budget numbers. The top tiers have delivered capacity, but choked by administration bloat as well. Moderate tiers is core of our fiscal constraint failures, where procurement routinely bypass local capacity and special grants are lost to municipal decay as well. Critical tiers consist of fiscal sinkhole operating as passive debt-saving vehicles. This committee must use its legislative power to break these bottlenecks. Otherwise, definitely, as we do the outlook there expand, we're definitely going to see things getting worse in that regard. The last slide, just go to the last one. It's just the next one. No, it's just also lastly to say, before I step down, Chair, with indulgence, a strategic preview of the committees. I heard some of them was talking about it. From the oversight of Division of Revenue and municipal grants, there are some of the tools we're developing for the committee to look and to invite you to look at those, particularly in build-up to elections, which look at the Division of Revenue, the role of the grants in the sector, and how that ensure that the sector can deliver, because I feel there's a lot of energy that this committee should place towards the local government sector as well. Thank you so much. I apologize for taking a longer time, but thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
You can thank the South African Human Rights Commission for donating 5 minutes.
Thank you. I meant to say thank you, Advocate.
So you can thank them in the meantime. Let me recognize members who want to put forward some questions. Siate, Honorable Siate. Sigede. That is that. Okay, Honorable Siate.
Okay, so thanks, Chair. So the implementation of the MTDP in the socioeconomic indicators, it's not only a function of a fiscal spending or public spending, but also includes private investment and other industry factors. How does your model consider this? Then has your methodology been reviewed by by other scholars? Then how did you assess the alignment of the MTDP with the APPs of departments, and did you factor the results of the framework as a basis? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Sigede.
No, thank you, Chair. Let me also welcome the presentation. Chair, before I make this comment, I just want to ask, what does PAIFS stand for?
Doc, do you want to respond to that quickly so that Honorable Sigede can
Say at the
proceed?
beginning, so it's okay. I'll say it very slowly. So there's no time limit here. It's Pan-African Institute for Fiscal and Policy Studies.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nazo,
No, thanks, Chair.
it's a
Chair.
branch of Shembe.
Yeah. My chair will be on the macro fiscal accountability and capital drawdown recommendation of the National Treasury to transition from a passive budget allocator to an active enforcer. The minister, in the current legislative framework, is not constrained in setting conditions for allocations, and the PFMA requires the minister to do so. Maybe, Prof, the recommendation should be to monitor the consequences of National Treasury on the conditions set and assess the effectiveness of the conditions. That's my input which I want to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof, just a quick question. On the 4 quadrants that you present here, and I don't want to get into all the technicalities, do you have any particular weighting to each one? Because you arrive at a score of either less than 10 or you say the high performing ones are greater than 6 and critical. So I just want to understand whether you've got a rating in that regard and what you weight what to what, or are they all equally weighted? That's what I'm trying to understand. Because that'll help, yeah. If you can respond there, Prof.
No, thank you so much, Chair and members. Look, I think definitely it's a good point around looking at the role of private investment in the process. But I think there's a component where we look at the consumption in some of the spending. But I will definitely look into building that. How does it fit into the whole thing? But I guess the point is to say we need to move away from assessing it as a probity exercise, but a lot looking at how, as a committee, we'll say allocation has made advancement into some of the component. And yes, the argument could be the lack of progress has to do with other side of the formula, but as a committee, we need to be confident that when you allocate funds, it will help us improve the performance of the macroeconomic variables or objectives. So that's the point, but I take that. And yes, the analytical framework, we're still looking into how to strengthen it, and definitely take input from different, like now I'm taking inputs from the committee, but yes, we'll do take inputs from different players there. When you say I'm just going to, yes, there is weighting for different component of the framework, where you look at, I'm trying to go back to the page, just a second. So the total score, if you have done well, you'll get 10. And just go, yes. The alignment, MTP alignment will 40% of the whole picture. The macro impact will 30%. The NDP is 20%, and the efficiency is 10%. There's a way that each and every one. So the heavy weight is really on medium-term development plan to say how does the allocation factor or the spending weighed a lot towards that component, the least being efficiency with 10%, but not in a fact of implementing. But even if, like for example, you do see that efficiency 10% is able to actually cause low scoring, because the bigger component of some of the entities that we looked at, they lack efficiency in that regard. And yeah, I think, for example, under the macro fiscal multiplier, we look at employment, we look at investment, we look at spending within the localized economy, how much such, from last year, obviously from prior years, how much this spending has been allocated within that perspective. We've got the NDP is one of the strong alignment. Look at efficiencies, look at the composition of employee, density of it, the frequency of environments, for example, and also the core to administration ratio, and determine the efficiency in that regard. And lastly, implementation capacity, look at the consequence management, the actual reduction of regular spending, and also where some of the audit outcomes, where we realize the governance failures within different entities. So it's look at quite variety of things. But I think I would want more time to sit to break down more in detail. But for me, I'm very happy that when I looked at the entities themselves that you presented to you, they actually confirms what we found here in their reports themselves. All of them. I can send a report that shows whatever they presented is in line with our findings in that regard. Thank you so much.
Honorable Kalaga Mazibuko.
No, Chair, thank you very much, and thank you to Prof for the responses. But maybe to follow up on Honorable Sikede's question on the acronym and the explanation thereof. I thought maybe because it's the first time we interact with the Institute, I thought maybe Prof will give us a bit of a background and the work the Institute has done, so that we have a better understanding, you know, as we put our heads together to the presentations he has made on the appropriations bill. Thanks.
Thank you. Prof, you've got 2 minutes just to respond to that.
That's a lot of time. For the first time, I feel I gave a lot of time. No. I think it's an open secret that I used to work for PBO. So when I left PBO, I started working on this because some of the work that I'm doing here is work that would have wished to have done in my previous life. So I continued with the work in my mind and I found this institute which has always been working a lot with some of the African countries and so on, things around fiscal issues. But also, I'll be very frank to say, I don't think we have a lot of fiscal analysis that we do in this country. And I feel it's a gap that lacks fiscal analysis, really looking at the role of the budget in a very sense of what it's supposed to be doing. We have very thin work in that area, in my view, and I was very excited to find some of the discussion. I mean, the other countries, we had fiscal institutions, which really looks at when the budget's introduced, who does the tax really impact immediately, and report to government, or this is what will mean for taxes that you introduce. We don't have a lot of that in more nuanced sense. So I feel there's a space, and I think this committee and more of budget committees can benefit in such analysis. When you look at university does a very good academic work, but there's a huge gap between what the university does and what the policy does. So that gap is quite big, and I felt that it's useful to have this contribution in a way that it becomes less influenced by anybody, becomes more independent. So that's my view. That's why I was excited to work. But I can do more explanation over coffee or something on what happens here. Thank you.
You asked for I gave you 2, then you took 5 now. Honorable Baden.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. Just from my side, I think this is a really good presentation and has brought some fresh insights and angles onto the different departments and their contribution. I noticed you didn't mention, unless I missed it, the social development budget. Have you got a score on that?
I do have a score on it. It's just that I didn't put it here because quite a lot of them I would have to, it's here on my working paper. Let me see. It's a bit, I mean, I'm saying here, while social development achieves peak at they have a 5.9. So I do say here, while they achieve peak strategic alignment due to its immediate impact on poverty alleviation and consumption stabilizations, its fiscal multiplier is heavily restricted. The post-bank legal disputes baseline admin cuts emphasize that without a digital automation monetization payout system, social grants administration remains vulnerable to severe systematic shocks and operational expenditure leakages thereof. So I have it here. So I have written some around it as well. Sure. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. Look, I mean, I think the two, it's a bit like you've presented to us a new thermometer. Now we have the job to interrogate the questions that are before us. But like any thermometer can give you a score on anything, what you then have to do is, when the thermometer says your temperature is high, then you have to make decisions consistent to how you bring your temperature down or up or whatever the case might be. So I appreciate the work there, Prof, and I'd like to engage more on the questions that you've put, because I think it'll help guide the committee so that the work becomes one where you could serve departments to say, rather than come and give us a PowerPoint of a billion slides, let's respond to a particular metric. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Honorable members, the last presentation done by BJC will be taken as a written submission. They've requested not to present, and so we will take that as a written submission. So that concludes the physical presentations for today. What I would like to do is move on, and I want to thank both the COSATU, the South African Human Rights Commission, and the PAJ, the PAIFS, for their presentation, and I want to appreciate the insights that have been shared today. And then I will release you accordingly. So thank you very much for coming through. Yes, Honorable Kalagawa Mazibu, we're going to move on to that last bit there.
I just want to ask on the BJC submission, which is a written submission. So does it mean that members should not comment, or members can comment and send written submissions too?
Sure. You can send them to Mashile and Denver. You can send them to Denver so that the submissions are put forward there. But that's a great point, Honorable Kalagama Zibuko. I didn't want to present it here without the presenters. They've asked for a written submission, so it will be considered in their light. Just on this last point on the two conversations we've been going. You've all been sent, honorable members, the presentation and the responses on human settlements portfolio committee, and then the planning, monitoring and evaluation request for additional funding to Stats SA. Where the matter now sits is that we've taken the reports both by the PBO, and I'd raised it before committee last time that the FFC had taken a view to say that's not their purview of work. What we're going to do is twofold. One, I have been engaging National Treasury through the Minister of Finance. We'll submit both those responses, Mashile, to them. And then the request that is being made is that in the medium-term budget policy statement, I know the Minister of Finance had spoken about this question of Stats SA going forward. So that work will then be engaged onto that. And then on the housing question, that they will give us a response in that score. So both those matters, as things stand at the moment, will be attended to in the MTBPS rather than in the Appropriations Bill of the 23rd. But I will raise at the tabling of the Appropriations Bill report on the 23rd, really the incapacity that Parliament often suffers from in order to execute its legislative mandate. I just think you can't write a law, ask Parliament to do a particular job that Parliament, once in trying to do the job becomes harder progressively. You then, to quote my former colleague and friend who passed away, James Self, used to say famously, the last place you want to be is to be a eunuch in a brothel. All the desire, but really none of the capability. So I'm just careful not to do, so that is part of one of the tabling the report, my reflections on this matter. Honorable Bateman and then Makakula. Are you covered? Makakula.
Chairperson, sorry, I just want one clarity from, I hear that you are saying you have shared, or you want us to share the analysis from PPO with the Minister of Finance, but I will say rather, maybe it will be better if you write a letter to the Minister of Finance requesting that, because when I look at that analysis, it doesn't tell us to say where does the money should come from. So it just speaks about what you can see on the E&E basically. So I will be afraid to send it to the Minister of Finance. Rather, I will say, write a letter via your office to the Minister of Finance requesting that this consideration be made during the MTPPS. than what I've seen in the letter from the PPO.
No, we can draft that particular letter in that regard. We've had conversation, but now we need to sum it up in documentation. But the point cannot be lost. That's why I even set it up at a meeting at the closure of yesterday, that I thought that the letter from the PBO, even more specific on the matter of the housing bit, I thought was weak. It was in fact a waste of our time collectively. But that speaks to the broader issue at core, which is that you can't have a bill that you can't execute against. Even if it wasn't on a full-time capacity basis, but it needs capacitation. Otherwise, it's a wasted law. Then we might as well just take it and say, we come here, we check for commas and spelling, and then that's the end of that. Honorable Kalaga Mazubu.
No, I think I'm covered, Chair. I wanted to follow up on what Mr. Makakula is saying. To say also the PBO is not quantifying the required financial need in the short term and medium term. So I think when you say the response is vague, I think you've covered me. I think, yeah, we support the recommendation, but I think the approach you've just alluded to and your discussion with the minister of taking care of this request in the MTPP medium-term budget is, I think it's going to save us from the delay on the tabling of the appropriations bill and all the required long process that is required. So I think it's I do support that approach, and also the letter, and maybe the meeting, if time allows, with National Treasury and States SA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I think I agree with what Honorable Mazibuko has said, also following up on what Mr. Sfiso has said from the strategic point of view. But I also wanted to find out if, because we're thinking that the medium-term budget would be in the last quarter, and we still have the second term that is coming, would it be advisable for us, perhaps, when we write that letter to the Minister of Finance, do we write the motivation as to how this can be done, or they'll see to it, or again, do we still have to meet with the two portfolio committees maybe during the next term so that we can thresh out the dynamics in relation to how this can be done, so that when we send that letter, we would also be having some kind of an understanding. Although the letter has to go before, but now that they had the courtesy of writing a letter to us, both the human settlement as well as the monitoring and evaluation, we will be writing letters back to them on that. Thank you so much.
Yes, Honorable Bateman.
Thanks, Chair. So I'd like to speak to three things. The first is the process by which the budgets get voted on, and whether we shouldn't be thinking about the possibility of individual budgets being voted on and being passed, and even if the overall budget is not yet passed. So, because at the moment, if the overall budget is, or if any one budget vote fails, then everything fails. It's an all or nothing, and I wonder whether that wouldn't be something that's worth looking at from a legislative reform point of view, that we could just consider, because I know the Chair has expressed the concern that that we have the responsibility but not the power to execute, or not the power to follow through. And then secondly, on the Stats SA one, if we're pushing it out to the MTBPS, can we not simply put it into the adjustments budget? Could we not simply put it into our recommendations rather than doing a separate letter? And strictly speaking, we're actually we're only halfway there, because we don't have the exact numbers and we also don't have the corresponding savings. Because at this stage we're saying what we had considered doing was reallocating money from somewhere else to Stats SA. So we haven't actually identified where that saving would come from. Now it may be that by the time we get to the adjustments budget, the economy has grown so much. I mean, I'm not saying it's likely, but it may be, or it might be that the TARS program has realized all sorts of savings again, and therefore the minister can draw on that money to be able to spend more on Stats SA. But we're not simply saying spend more. At the moment, as I understand it, what we're saying is we would like to see a reallocation. And then thirdly, on the human settlements, I actually valued the report that was done by the PBO on that, and I thought we're getting closer to the kind of insightful analysis of departmental budgets, which actually empowers us as a committee to press for adjustments and changes. And I think we could be asking some quite critical questions of human settlements arising from some of the revelations that have come out through that report of areas of inefficiency and waste and possible combining of programs. And there are quite a lot of practical things that have come out that human settlements could implement, which would actually release more money, and also pooling of money in entities which really should be using that money and so on. So there's a lot that's come out in that report that I think in our recommendations we could feed through to the Minister in terms of how National Treasury could engage with human settlements to become more effective in the use of what they are allocated and the entities that are under their control. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, maybe. I also think, Chair, human settlements does not require the amendment of the bill. As much as we understand their situation, and also we've seen the PBO presentation, I think the National Housing Finance Corporation needs to focus on discussing its funding model and also how it can raise capital from the market and how it can get additional funding from the fiscus. I don't think it's a matter of amendment of the bill. I thought maybe after Honorable Bateman, let me just give that support as well. Thank you.
Sfiso, I wanna. Here's what my recommendation is. Let's, if we take the matter separately, you know, this conversation about intra-departmental transfers, program realignment, savings, right, is work at some level that's being done by TARS, at another level applies right throughout government, in essence, because you remember, I think there's a conversation even about health, paying of overtime and how you rationalize that as a savings for the purposes of health. So there's a lot of that kind of work that's been done. So I'm persuaded on a few things. The first is I take the recommendation that says that we need to make a recommendation on the intra-efficiencies that happen in terms of funding for the national, the housing bit. I can't remember the acronym for it all. The recommendation around funding for Stats SA is going to be made anyways. Whether the letter had come through or not, it had come through two levels. The BRRR process had made the recommendation, and as a committee we'd been issued with a letter to that effect. And thirdly, it comes out of the oversight report. We went to Stats SA. That was their recommendation. So we don't need to debate the point about it being put in the recommendations, as it were. The fourth aspect is this, is that I actually, in the bilateral engagements with National Treasury, this is where we are dealing narrowly with one piece of legislation, the Money Bills and Related Matters Act. And it prescribes the steps that you need to take to be able to achieve how money can be shifted not only from intra the department, but from one department to another. And that's what we are testing here, is to say, if you think health has not used its money for X, and you meet the Minister of Health, and you meet the Minister of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, how does money move? The committee is recommending money move from here to there. I'm just using a fictitious example. Because the law then prescribes then how you execute against that, achieve that sort of transfer of funds from one level to another. So that's what we're trying to test for. Otherwise, those components of the law are a waste of time. So my point I'm trying to allude to here is that the letter must give expression to that exercise and then proceed to say, we need to then do the hard yards of following what the law prescribes. Meet the affected minister, meet the minister raising the question, make the submission. And it even prescribes the days to which everyone must respond to the exercise. 10 days for this, etc., etc. So that's what we're trying to put to test here. Not so that we can test whether a law is drivable or not, but because we're also trying to solve a very important question of Stats SA and the request that comes from the Housing Corporation. So that is the point I'm coming from. And in essence, my only reason for conceding to going to the next term is because by prescriptions of time, we've run out of time for this term. Unless you want to say we can't vote on the 23rd, we must vote in July, which is also possible given that the law permits that. But then I'm not sure who's coming in July. So that is where I'm coming from a school of thought point of view. That's what we're trying to exercise. So can I sum it up in that regard, unless you've got a major point to make?
Just two, Chairperson. One is the process issue. On the report itself, we need to reflect the letters that have been written to us, because we need to speak to that on the report. But secondly, the point that you are making about Parliament's inability to fully implement the legislation, the Money Bills Act, it's not only a problem of this committee, because those letters, if we were doing everything correct, they should have came with the proposals to say how the portfolio committee sees the money moving from one program to another. So now, I'm proposing that we recommend to Parliament as well, because it's not our problem. If a letter is submitted from a portfolio committee as empty as it is, we are going to cry with time. But if the letter was submitted to us with all the details to say what the portfolio committee proposed, to say the money must move from this program to this program, please, Standing Committee on Appropriations, consider that. Then it will have made our work easy. So I said at one point to this committee, the understanding of the money bills, the differences in understanding between us and the portfolio committees, it's what makes the implementation of the legislation difficult. Because you have engaged in an exercise of requesting the PPO to make some recommendation in the FFC. But if the process was followed correctly, when you received that letter, it should have contained that information with proposals from the portfolio committees. Yes. But because the portfolio committees are not aware of how the Money Bills Act works, then they take the problem and then put it to your table. And then now we don't have time.
Sure.
No, so that's our problem. We need to make a recommendation to the speaker to say, probably in your training, because I know that you are always trained from time to time, all members. Portfolio committees must begin to be trained on the Money Bills Act, because ultimately, whatever policies that they are discussing in that space, there must be funding that follow those policies. And then our problem is there.
I totally agree with you. And the point is, I had raised this in the chairperson's meeting of Parliament to say the law is prescriptive. And there was a slide that was presented by Parliament in the training to say this is what it is, but it doesn't contain the very detailed discussion you are putting to say the motivation can't just be we need more money. But so what I'm going to request, Mashile, is we need to draft letters in response to the letters, let alone acknowledgement. We need to respond to say, here's the process, here's where we're taking it, and here's where the exercise has gone. So we need 3 letters to the 2 respective letters that we've got, and a letter to National Treasury that speaks to the two respective issues. I took great exception to what the FFC did. Because if you'll remember when we met with the FFC, I said, don't come here and tell me analysis. If you are unhappy with allocation X, make a recommendation that is fiscally prudent. They've got the capacity to do that. Make that recommendation. That's what the law says. But the FFC sort of said, this is not our purview, it's your problem. I will feed back to them to say, well, when next you come, I will also say, well, it's like going to a meteorologist. They must tell me what the weather is saying. They must tell me it's raining, and then I'll tell them, fine, whatever I want to do after that, whether I want to wear a jacket, take an umbrella, is my problem, not yours, which I don't think is helpful. So I will engage the chairperson of the commission to say, you've got the research capacity, you've got the work. I'm not asking you for rocket science. I'm asking you to do work that you would normally do in your normal course of work anyways, because your budget book that you make submissions into National Treasury with in the budget making cycle is already embedded into the issue. So I'm a bit baffled by your response. So, honorable members, if we can take those respective steps, I will then, obliged in that regard, we will convene next week Tuesday when we meet defense, and then next week Friday when we consider the report. Yes, Mashila.
Yes. Thank you, Chairperson. Just to remind you that we should raise this issue of the announcements. We have just circulated the correspondence from the Chair.
Oh,
From the Office of the Auditor General, there's an appointment there. I think members have been sent that communication to the WhatsApp group. That's number one. Number two, we, just to also reiterate the adjustment in terms of the date for considering the report on Friday next week, the 12th. And we've just received an apology from Honorable Mwali and Honorable Gamede. Honorable Gamede is in the Human Settlement Portfolio Committee. Thank you, Chair.
I want to request Mashile. Procedurally, you need to give me clarity here. You can't send an apology at the end of the meeting. You just cannot. Otherwise, can I apologize for last week's meeting? Because if the time that the meeting, your apology must be sent before the meeting. It can't be sent after the meeting. Otherwise, and I'll communicate this to members, because you can't do that. Otherwise, apologies can't be noted retrospectively. Otherwise, any meeting I've missed this year, I must send all the apologies up front. It can't be like that. So I don't know if we can, as part of this particular meeting, deal with apologies. Otherwise, it just doesn't help. I will ask members, if you have an apology to send, you need to send it up front in the meeting so that we get it ahead of time. Can't be retrospective. Makagula, you want to defend your comrades?
No, Chair, I just want to say, in addition to what you are saying, including that of the Deputy Minister of Finance.
It's permanent.
She's not a permanent member of the committee, but every day we read like his apology. So it's similar to what you are saying.
It's automated. No. I'll take the point and I'll raise it with the respective members. Honorable members, in that light, let us bring your helmets next week, Tuesday, when we meet the Department of Defense. They are the last ones in the midst. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
If you are an immigrant, an illegal immigrant, I'm warning you ahead of time, the army is here next week. Maybe send your apology now.